Hi, my name is Andre Borges and I'm here to talk about something that not many people outside of India actually understand. The glorification of Winston Churchill and how that's a problem. I'm gonna cut right to the chase. He was an evil, racist man who brought about the death of millions of Indians. And the way recent Hollywood movies are portraying him as this big hero is kind of insulting. The Darkest Hour, a film that won Gary Oldman his first Oscar for an undoubtedly amazing performance as the British Prime Minister, has garnered praise for Oldman's performance, the film in general, but also for its historical accuracy. Now, history books in America, Australia, Europe, and other Western countries portray him as a grand hero of World War II who propelled the Allied powers to victory. Yeah, of course, the death of 3 million Indians was, well, left out of the film. See, what the history books of Firangs don't tell you is what ours taught us. It isn't just the Darkest Hour. Indians' involvement in a lot of efforts during World War II was left out of a lot of Hollywood productions. Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk, Netflix hit The Crown, Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds, Tom Hooper's The King's Speech, and these are just the popular ones. There have been dozens of Hollywood films dramatizing Churchill's role in World War II, but none touch upon one of his darkest actions, the Bengal famine. So, I'm gonna tell you about it. The people of Bengal, as with many other states in India, depended on grain crops like wheat and rice for their livelihood. However, in late 1942, a huge cyclone hit the area, destroying a large amount of crop yield and leaving the surviving crops infested with fungus. Thus began a time of massive starvation and famine across Bengal. This leads up to 1943, a time in which 3 to 4 million Indians died in one of the worst massacres the world has ever seen. Now, what's come to be popularly known as the Bengal famine was actually a direct result of Churchill's executive decision and effort on the part of the Allied faction. India during the time of World War II was still under British rule, so Churchill, having full control of India's resources, did what the British do best. They used us. He ordered the diversion of food supplies from already starving Indians to already well-supplied British soldiers in Europe. So, instead of giving the starving Indians some relief and providing them with more amounts of grain, he did just the opposite. Massive amounts of food stockpiles were taken out of the hands of ill and dying Indians. And Churchill's only response to the Delhi government's exclamation that Indians are dying in the streets was an alleged telegraph asking that if the famine was so bad, then why is Gandhi still alive? The famine brought about death and suffering like no one had ever seen before. People died of starvation, people died of diseases. First-hand accounts explain that the streets were littered with the bodies of the dead because the living were too weak to pick up the bodies, bury or cremate them. Parents drowned their children to save them from a slow, agonizing death, and still others took their own lives to find relief. All this because of a man who's revered as a brilliant figure in history. Here's Congress MP Shashi Tharoor speaking on the matter.
I certainly think Mr. Churchill needs very severe re-examination. He has as much blood on his hands as Hitler does. And this is the man whom the British persist in hailing as some sort of apostle of freedom and democracy, when to my mind he is really one of the more evil rulers of the 20th century, only fit to stand in the company of the likes of Hitler, Mao and Stalin.
In 2011, writer and journalist Madhushree Mukherjee released a book called Churchill's Secret War. Now, through the book, Mukherjee explains that she went through a lot of footnotes, a lot of historical texts, she met with historians, and she got to the bottom of previously unknown facts.
When I started to study the famine, I read for at least 2 years just to catch up on Indian colonial history, the process of wealth extraction that the British imposed on India. And only after that did I try to start reading about the Bengal famine, which at the time I started working on it was already the most studied famine in the world, I believe. I did not expect that I would find anything new to say about it. But as I kept reading, I kept having these questions in my mind. Why was no relief sent? And I asked a couple of historians, experts, one of whom said that was the wrong question to ask. I should look at only local factors to understand the famine, which is exactly what historians and anthropologists had done thus far. At which point I decided that I would go to the United Kingdom's archives and take a look at the Ministry of Shipping files and the Ministry of Food files, at the war files, things that historians of India don't usually look at. It was obvious to me from my reading that the files on the Bengal famine at the Indian office had been purged. But when I went to the Ministry of Shipping Archives in the United Kingdom, I was astonished to find that there were 3 War Cabinet discussions on sending food to Bengal in 1943. And in all 3 of these, the decisions were very negative for India. In the first of these, while famine was raging, no food was scheduled at all. And I feel I found something like a smoking gun for saying that Churchill was directly responsible for at least the lack of relief during the Bengal famine.
And the main point of the book supports the claim that Churchill's decision directly led to the death and famine that plagued Bengal. Mukherjee explains in the book that even before the famine started, Churchill's policies may have directly contributed towards it. See, what happened was, in 1942, Japan took hold of Bengal's next-door neighbor, Burma. To stave off the impending Japanese invasion, British forces took charge of the region and evicted thousands of farmers and cutting off a large part of Bengal's food supply, which was obtained through trade with Burma. Now think about this. Even though the famine was rapidly spreading across the region, India exported 70,000 tons of rice for British forces in Europe. Sir Archibald Wavell and the Secretary of State for India, Leopold Emery, requested food to be sent back to India to relieve the starving people. Countries like the United States, Canada and others offered to help, but Churchill denied it. See, images of news and famine never made its way to the rest of the world. Hell, even the people of Britain didn't know about it. By 1943, it was estimated that to survive, India needed about 1 million tons of grain. In 1944, Churchill shipped about 350,000 tons to India.
So there were 2 factors behind Churchill's denying food to India. First, he wanted to use the surplus food, that wheat that was in Australia, not to feed Indians, whom he hated anyway, and I'll get to that, but to store for future use in Europe. Second, he hated Indians at this point. In fact, he even says that at one point in 1944 that he wished Indians didn't breed so fast because that kept them from the doom that they deserved, which was extermination. In Hollywood, he is celebrated as a war leader, and this imperial side of him, you hardly see that at all.
It was only during the harvest of December 1944 that the famine completely ended, after an upper estimate of 4 million people lost their lives. Look, it's no secret that the British committed crimes against their then colonies that we're still 70 years later still recovering from. But now, to glorify through world cinema the men responsible for destroying several nations is not only adding insult to injury, it should be considered a whole new crime in itself. It makes light of the history suffered by 1/7 of the world's population. But then again, rewriting history to make themselves look better isn't something the British haven't done before.